for the last 3 decades, we've all been told we should diet, we should lose weight. Diet, lose weight, diet, lose weight. Why? Did you know that many, many foods in America, that there are different versions that are sold over in other countries because they don't allow all of the additives and preservatives that we allow? Many, many people have been deceived, and it's not, there's no blame, there's no shame, there's no anything. It's just the enemy has learned how to deceive people. But the sheer number on the scale doesn't do anything.
What you are about to hear has not been sanctioned or authorized. It is not a heterodox line of thought. And yet, strangely, you feel as if you've experienced these thoughts yourself. What you are about to hear are the thoughts that arrive at a time we call the 0 hour.
So now on the show I have Tanya Jolliffe. She is a non-diet registered dietitian nutritionist, a licensed dietitian, and a certified integrative mental health professional. We are going to talk a little bit about health, diet culture, and that arena. And you guys know that that's not my wheelhouse of expertise. You saw me eating terrible things on the last stream, which I apologize, I'm not going to eat on the stream anymore. My wife got after me about that. Tanya, welcome to the show. This is your house. Maybe you can steer me in the right direction.
Great to be here. You know, one of those where that's one of the things you just mentioned about diet culture. It's that whole idea of good and bad foods, and trying to help people understand that, you know, that's the enemy's lie about good and bad foods. There's foods that are more nutritious and there's foods that are less nutritious. And we need to start to think about it differently, because we start to think about things as good and bad, we end up being in shame. We end up feeling that we have, you know, done something wrong. And that's what kind of leads us down the path to do it again, because, well, if I've already made a mistake, and it just brings guilt and shame. And food to nourish our bodies, it's not intended to be about guilt and shame. And so that's the culture shift that I really want to bring to the table. I have decades of experience with nutrition therapy, and nutrition therapy is very different than a diet.
Okay, so that already tickles my ears, because it makes me feel like when you go on a spending spree and you're like, well, I already spent the rent money, I might as well spend the energy money now. For those who are bad with money.
Right.
It says that you also work with a lot of groups, and do you do workshops or anything like this?
I do some, you know, public speaking with different groups, Rotary groups, Kiwanis groups, business groups, church groups, ladies groups. I do small group sessions with eating approach. So a variety of different ways, and as well as one-on-one.
Okay, so it sounds like this is about to take us into a kind of a new, almost like a new worldview when it comes to diet and health and how we approach that. And the food is very important to me. I used to be a chef cook, and so I brought a lot of that experience to the table. And I'm trying to weed out some of the things that my doctor's telling me to steer clear of in terms of cholesterol, but it's not always fun. So I don't like to think about food. And so if I know that you have your that you've released a book, The Mindful Me Journey, a 40-day guide toward a healthier relationship with food and exercise. That's the kind of thinking I think is going to keep me alive long enough to see my daughters graduate. So anything that you can bring to the table to help get me and my audience on that path is going to be more than welcome.
Mindfulness is, you know, understanding about what's happening internally and externally right here and right now. It's not focused on tomorrow. And if your scripture tells us don't worry about tomorrow, tomorrow has enough worry of its own. It's about being more present in today and paying attention to today and what am I doing today. This is looking back at maybe the past choices that I made, et cetera, et cetera. So you mentioned cholesterol. So there nutrition therapy. There are foods that are higher in cholesterol and saturated fats. There are foods that are lower in cholesterol and saturated fat. And that's a nutrition therapy approach to help a medical condition. And that is very different than what the world tells us about a diet. Diets are things that people go on and go off. Therapy is things we need to do long term. And when we look at diet, diet and exercise are part of your physical well-being, right? But physical well-being is just one aspect of your life. There's emotional well-being, there's mental well-being, there's financial well-being, there's spiritual well-being, educational well-being, relationship well-being, social well-being, and all of these are little nuances of who we are as a total person. Our soul, mind, body, spirit influence all of those things. And so we get so much time spending talking about physical well-being. You go to your doctor and your doctor pretty much focuses on your physical well-being. That's where the enemy plays most of his games, and that's where the world mostly focuses. Well, we've learned in the last few years, especially through COVID, that we've got to be a little bit more in tune with mental well-being. Well, mental and emotional well-being are directly affected and influenced by what you eat, and they directly influence what you will eat. So my book is really a workbook, and it's geared towards helping people understand what they do with food and why they do it. And once they start to unpack those rules, routines, rituals, habits, we're a chronic dieting society. For the last 3 decades, we've all been told we should diet, we should lose weight. Diet, lose weight, diet, lose weight. Why? Well, they tell us it's because it'll make us healthier. They tell us it'll make us, we'll be able to manage our diabetes or our blood pressure. But the truth is, the weight on the number on the scale doesn't help you improve your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your blood cholesterol. It's the habits, the routines, and the rituals that you do that change the behaviors that allow you to lose weight, that allow you to have those improvements. But the sheer number on the scale doesn't do anything, because I can really overhydrate myself or underhydrate myself and gain or lose 5 pounds today.
Yeah.
But that's just water weight. That's not any kind of weight loss. But it plays on our mind, it plays on our choices and our decisions. And I say that as somebody that had disordered eating in my past. So I know I was my most unhealthiest at my lowest weight as an adult because I did it in all the wrong ways. So I wasn't healthier just because the number was less.
So, okay. So I'm noticing the correlation of, from what we do here, we notice how we can't change the world through politics or even through culture. In some instances, it has to start in the spiritual and then it flows down naturally. It seems like you have something of a similar setup or a similar perspective on how we diet or how we live. So it seems like it's a little more than looking just your physical body, your numbers on the scale, things like that, focusing more on, am I seeing that right? Like a spiritual aspect to it?
Totally. Each person was made in the image of God. And so we are each, Psalm 139, we are each fearfully and wonderfully made. We were made for a purpose. We are made in God's image. The Holy Spirit dwells within us, and we are a temple. Do you not know that your bodies are not a temple of the Holy Living Spirit? For Samuel, the world looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. All those things are the truth about who we are. But that's not what the world is telling us. That's not what the world is feeding us. That's not what we are buying. We're buying a product or a service to lose weight. We're not looking at our body as a temple and how we're nourishing it and feeding it, what we're doing with it, what we're doing to it. And so that's the world's culture. But God's culture is that we have to love ourselves, mind, body, spirit, that we can nurture our soul and we can be exactly who God created us to be for the purposes in which he made us. But if you're focused on a diet and the number on scale, I'm pretty sure you're not focusing on your worth and your value to the Lord and how you're nourishing your body, mind, body, and spirit.
So it sounds like the culture around dieting has falsely set up a false premise in our mind that diet is something that you turn on and off for a certain amount of time. Is that how?
And you do it for outward appearance, largely. scale, the number of the scale is about outward appearance. Now they shroud it with a little bit of truth, because remember, that's what the enemy does, right? He takes a little bit of truth and then he puts it. He says, "Oh, but your health can be better. You can manage your disease. You can manage this." But every image that you see for promoting a product is based on a scantily clad person, usually a woman, looking honest. Well, if you look at that commercial a little closer, you will see an older woman who is of an endomorphic type, looking sad and depressed and unhappy as she's sliding the scale on a the number on a scale. And then they'll tell you about their product or service. And then they will switch to a mesomorphic body type that's really buff and usually 20 years younger. So it's all this deception in the mind that if I just change how I look, if I just change and look younger, if I just use these products, if I get Botox, if I just do this, if I just do that, I'll be worthy, I'll be good enough. Okay, those are all the lies of the enemy, because the Lord makes you good enough. The Lord makes you worthy. And so it's all of those lies. It's all wrapped into one. And we bought it all hook, line, and sinker, unfortunately. And it's unfortunate because we keep perpetuating that lie that if I just step on the scale and if I just lose this and if I just change that, it's going to suddenly make life better and stronger and happier. And those are deceptions that keep us away from the truth of living our lives in God's image and living a whole and happy life grounded in truth of who we are as a whole person.
So I'm starting to see why, one, this hasn't worked for me very well in my past. The one time personally that I can say I had a successful diet, it had nothing to do with my appearance. It had nothing to do with, vapid type of thinking. It was a cholesterol I was pre-diabetes. And I was like, if I don't change my diet, I'm going to die. And so my entire mind and my entire lifestyle went into like this, I don't want to say panic mode, but I was very, very serious about like, I will eat this, I will not eat that. And it just is what it is. I didn't even really get emotionally involved, really. It was just like, this is just how it has to be. And ever since then, I haven't really given it that serious a thought, and I haven't seen very much success. But I don't, again, like I said, food is valuable for me and my family. We love good and beautiful food. We love the social environment. It's like a ritual in our house. It's an institution almost. Not that we worship food or anything, but it's very important to us. So it sounds like you're saying that there's a difference between the mechanical structure of a diet and something bigger, something more of a lifestyle.
Well, God created food, right? He created everything in this earth. He created animals, plants, everything that we're supposed to eat. But it's how we prepare it. For instance, okay, you come from a chef background. Herbs and spices make food taste better, right?
Yeah.
Now, everybody, got to put salt, got to put salt, got to put salt. Well, salt kind of, in some way, just covers up the flavor, right? But when you put the right herbs and spices, you're enhancing the flavor. And that's the goal. The same with your diet, the same with the meal plan that you follow. You want it to enhance your life. You want it to enhance everything about your plan and your purpose for being here. And so sometimes food is not used in that way. It's used as an escape. It's used as a comfort. For someone who has poor relationship well-being, they turn to food as their friend. For people who have impulse control issues because they're, just different relational or vocational well-being, stress management, all these, they turn to food as an outlet to help them deal or cope. Just the same, somebody would turn to drugs, they would turn to cigarettes, they would turn to gambling. It's all the same thing. If you're misusing anything from its original purpose, then you've been deceived into using something incorrectly instead of finding a new way to cope, manage, and deal. And usually it goes back to what's your relationship with the Lord, what's your relationship with other believers, and are you believing the lies of the world, or are you embracing truth of the Lord?
Okay, this sounds like this could be a fun journey. So I like how you're able to bring everything back to the same point of relationship, of something holy, something good, something enjoyable.
Yep.
I do see a lot of the word wellness in your bio and in your literature. You have LIT Wellness Solutions is something that you're the founder of and a provider for. Could you explain that a little bit?
LIT Wellness Solutions. LIT stands for Live Truth.
Okay.
And my tagline is Ignite the Change Within. So much of our life is about external motivation, external change, external direction, doing these things because my boss told me to, doing these things because my doctor told me to, doing these things because other world tells me to, versus finding what God is calling me to do, how he's calling me to live. And what is that? Wellness is well-being, balanced, all the different dimensions of your life. Pretty much, your life cannot be out of balance. And if it's out of balance, it's dis-ease. And dis-ease brings disease. And so, a prime example I'll use is diabetes, heart disease. I worked for years and years with people. I worked with people who had end-stage organ disease. So kidney failure, liver failure, people on dialysis, people who had weeks and months to live because they were waiting on an organ transplant. And then I worked on those people who had liver and kidney transplants. And I worked with the sickest of the sick. And so when you're sick and your body is diseased, you have to follow the most strict meal plan to balance protein and electrolytes and all of these things. It's like life or death. Well, that's how we get in our life. That's how we get in our life, is we get to the very, very bottom. We're in a job we hate, but it brings in the money. But we don't see how it's draining our family, it's draining our relationships, it's draining our life right out of us. The stress of it, the strain of it brings on physical dis-ease. It brings on all kinds of aspects of disease. And so this job that's supposedly bringing in the money is basically ruining the well-being and the rest of our life. Same with relationships, if it's a toxic relationship. So food is one aspect, but as a mental health professional, you start to look at how food is an element that kind of unlocks all these different areas and stuff in our life. And that's where the well-being and LIT Wellness Solutions is looking at using food as a way to help people understand what are they doing in their life, why are they doing it, where are they in balance, where are they in balance, how is stress managing that. And stress impacts everything about disease management, about life management. It's at the center of every dimension of your well-being.
Yeah, and it's interesting how when you're taking an approach of doing things from a certain perspective, doing it for the right reason, living to be holy, doing things for God. My wife and I, when we first got married, we realized that we were going to have to make some very sudden and strict changes to our lifestyle in order to ensure that we were going to be moving toward holiness, because we weren't two single people living together. Like, we were now a unit, and just changing that perspective a little bit has big changes in a lot of different areas. It changed how we raise our kids. It changed how we consume information. And it seems like this is an area that's been a blind spot for us that we could learn from this perspective and from this literature.
Let's talk about that a little deeper. Okay. So what the scripture tells us is the two shall become one flesh, right? So if we say that we're living by the scriptures, then that in all areas of our life. That implies to how we nourish our body, how we move our body, how we interact with other people. We do all of these different things. And it is very overlooked because it's been reduced by the enemy to be focused on losing weight. It's not looking at it as a way of nourishing your very body, nourishing your very soul, and being able to be ready to be purpose that you have. So as a follower, you either believe the word of the Lord or you don't. You either put it into practice, do not merely hear the word, but put it into action, or you don't. And many people have been deceived. And it's not, there's no blame, there's no shame, there's no anything. It's just the enemy has learned how to deceive people, keep from focusing on, they focus on religion, and they don't focus on the very word of God that gives them the very truth, life, and health that they're actually say that they're looking for. And so it's trying to bring that scope back and look at it and say, okay, I like food. That's great. God wants you to like food. It's like saying I like sex. He wants you to like sex in the right context, in the right prescription, right?
Yes.
And so it's the same as sex being shamed as this horrible bad thing. No, in the marriage, in a committed relationship of marriage, it's a wonderful, blessed thing by God. Same with food. There's not good foods and bad foods. There's foods that nourish us and make our temple healthy and holy, and there are foods that defame our temple, make it corrupt and make it unhealthy and unholy. And that's not about ritualistic food things and religious food practices. It's just basically saying, if you're putting a bunch of man-made, genetically modified junk into your body, that's not what God made. God made fresh fruits and fresh vegetables that right off a vine. He made animals that graze on the grass and feed off of streams and brooks. And if that's the type of meat that you're eating, that's of God. But if you're eating a bunch of pesticide, ridden vegetables, and if you're eating a bunch of things that are altered and tainted, those aren't of God.
Yeah.
And the enemy knows that, right? The enemy knows that.
So one of the examples that comes to mind when you talk about that last part was this whole chicken egg thing that we just went through. And in my last members only stream, we were going through some articles that showed how the food that they were feeding the chickens caused them to stop laying eggs. And as soon as a lot of these owners changed over the feed, then they started laying eggs again. And so it really got me thinking about the correlation between the chicken egg scenario and, well, I guess this is a new chicken egg scenario, and humans and the way that we operate, because it's not just about weight and weight management. It's it can affect your emotions. It can affect your thinking. A lot of different stuff that just doesn't come to mind when you're young and single and running and gunning all the time. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, you talk about the stuff, and it is right. Is which comes first? Do I feel lethargic and have no energy because of what I'm eating, or am I, is it the other way around? And it does apply. But what you just said about that whole chicken and egg thing, you've seen all these egg factories. The eggs are sky high right now. The price of eggs. Egg is the most perfect food God ever made. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I know there's been a lot of talk over the decades, so it's interesting to watch what the experts say depending on the next 5 years.
It's a 7 in pH. So, our pH scale, our blood is 7.2. An egg is a 7. It's a perfect neutral thing. It's also the highest biological value protein of any. And it's also a glycemic neutral item. So an egg is what God provided as one of the most wholesome things that we could eat. And isn't it funny that it is being used right now in society as a manipulation tool by the enemy?
Yeah.
It's not a coincidence. It's not an accident. Now, I'll tell you something else. I just read some research a couple days ago that actually the egg yolk antibodies actually protect against and heal SARS-CoV-2 infection.
No way. That's really interesting.
Yep. So reading that, and one of the things that I read and makes total sense is that why they're burning down all of these egg factories, and is there more to it to be able to keep this going and going and going? Now,
because that's sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I don't know the answer, but it's awful suspicious to me. And just like a lot of other things that, we weren't talking about vitamin D levels during COVID. We weren't telling people that vitamin D, and that the people that had the higher vitamin D levels had less outbreaks of flu or COVID. So there's a lot of ways that the enemy uses and manipulates food to keep us from using it to nourish and strengthen ourselves. And I know I've diverted from your original question, but the egg thing made me think of that, is that, God doesn't do anything by accident. So he produced eggs to be this perfect food. And that pH, I'll go in that direction. A lot of the foods that we love, soda is one of the most acidic things that you can put into your body. And fruits and vegetables are some of the most basic that we can put in. Our blood wants to stay at a 7. Our body wants to stay at a pH of 7. People who have very, very acidic diets, consuming lots of junk food, basically, but I label them that because they're just more acidic and they don't provide a lot of nutrients, lots of processed foods. They keep our bodies very acidic. People whose body are more acidic have more disease, more cancer. Cancer and disease cannot flourish in base, alkaline. So that's why we need a variety of foods in our plate, so that we have alkaline foods and acidic foods at the same time in the same meal. But it's also why people, you might see pH water high, like a 9.5 pH water. That's why, because that's providing that more basic. It's providing that other side to bring us back to 7, so that our lungs don't have to work hard at that respiratory acidosis risk. And metabolic acidosis, our kidneys don't have to work so hard to keep that acid-base balance the way God designed it to be. But an egg is a perfect food. So God knew our bodies needed those basic fruits, vegetables, proteins, and he provided those for us. And we've allowed the world. Did you know, this is another one, your current topics. Did you know that many, many foods in America, with all of their additives and preservatives, that there are different versions that are sold over in other countries because they don't allow all of the additives and preservatives that we allow?
That I did know a little bit about.
So we have the most unhealthiest food of anybody on the planet of a first world country. Man. We poison ourselves by what we eat. The FDA does not look out for us. I don't care what anybody says. The FDA does not look out for us. They allow all kinds of things that make us unhealthy and unwell.
I think this is what kind of lit the fire under me and my wife to start looking into some of this stuff, because it seems like after COVID, after the lockdowns, after everybody got really hyper about stuff, we started to really see like the food manufacturing sabotage. That's a really hyperactive situation, and it's way underreported.
Right.
And then, you mentioned vitamin D. The thing about the egg really got me going about, man, and I'm willing to explore a lot of this stuff. I'm be thinking about this all day now. But these are areas that when in my research previously, I got to a wall where I had to stop for a while, because it seemed like all signs were pointing to that whole population bomb way of thinking, that eugenicists, bringing down the population. Like, I don't like to think about that stuff, and it really made me stop. And as I keep digging in the research, it's like, if people are unhealthy, if people are easier to control, it seems to be going in that direction, and it seems really, really sinister the more you look into it.
I think that you have to take people for, if tell you evil, believe them. If they tell you, who they are, believe them. Yeah. Bill Gates openly said in interviews about population control. He said, if we can just do a good job with vaccines, we can limit population. Yeah, so you read the Georgia Guidestones, they make it very clear that their interest is in population control. And they're going
Yeah.
to do it in a variety of ways. But they're also going to do it by making us sick to make the pharmaceutical companies have the answer and have the medicine that we need to take. And you look at the numbers of medicines, people are taking more and more and more medicine than they took 30 years ago. 30 years ago, if you had high blood pressure, you took one medicine. Now, if
Yeah.
somebody has high blood pressure, they're taking 3.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah.
Because all the other food and stress in their life, the food contamination, the additives and the preservatives, and stress and the chronic stress that they're living under is making their blood pressure harder and harder to manage. And so we're not teaching lifestyle techniques to manage blood pressure. We're not teaching lifestyle techniques, wellness techniques, understanding how all of our body works together, all the life factors work together. We're just here, take a pill, take a pill, take a pill.
Yeah.
And that so they can make us die off really easy, but after they've taken all their money.
Yep. And to kind of round it into the spiritual aspect of it, and pull from what you were saying about the job, people working jobs that they hate. We in our household had to make hard decisions about me not working specific jobs that did pay more, but they were draining the life out of me. And for these very reasons, like things that it's a culture, it's not necessarily a culture. It is the enemy. He comes to bring death. His system over this world is meant to bring death. And that's, I guess, what kind of shook me as I started looking into like COVID, disease, dieting, food manufacturing stuff. This, like you said, the Georgia Guidestones, like all of these things I've looked into, and it's all pointing at this evil system of death that's meant to drive people to death. And so obviously God gives life and wants us to have life. And it seems like the people that are responsible enough to at least try to take their own food, homesteaders, things like that. Like these people are rediscovering nature, natural food, godly living. It's a very holistic approach, really. It's not just diet.
When you listen to the World Economic Forum, and you listen to the evil that they tell us that they want to bring on us, that we're going to live in 15-minute cities and all of this kind of stuff.
Eat the bugs and live in pods.
I just heard you're only going to get 2,500 calories a day, but you're also going to be working for them. You're going to get limited foods. They're going to tell you what foods you can have. I mean, yes, it is about holistic. And so this is where there's nothing about diet. Diet is about a manipulation and whatever. It's not about nourishing. It's not about feeding. It's not about embracing what do I need to be healthy, happy, and whole. And so it's worldly lies for sure. And we get to decide each individually. Are we going to continue living in diet culture that's focused on junky food, their GMO, modified additives and preservatives, that the line gets longer and longer on the label, right? You're reading the nutrition label and you see more and more additives and preservatives. When really we want to be purchasing things that have 4 and 5 ingredients or less. We want the first ingredient to be a whole food. So we want whole foods, but our corn has been modified, our wheat has been modified. So we don't even have the original foods that God created anymore, because they've been so modified. Monsanto has made lots and lots of money on modifying our seeds. And so,
we did look into that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let me stop you one more time. I gotta. So, escaping from this culture of death, this way of destroying ourselves, apparently, and obviously, the food that we eat and the things that we feed ourselves have been, unfortunately, worked into that. So, what are some things, if I could get some simple steps or simple questions that listeners can ask themselves that will help to move the needle back in the right direction so that we can start to live more holy, when it comes to our I feel like I don't want to say diet now. I mean, I know the word has 2 uses, but the way that our relationship with food, let's go with that.
Right. Relationship with food, and it's really about, how you're nourishing your body, really, and the meals and the snacks that you're selecting.
Mhm.
A diet is really nothing more than a meal plan, right? The foods that you select, do you select what kind of macronutrient, distribution do you select at breakfast, lunch, dinner? Do you subscribe to breakfast, lunch, dinner, or are you an intermittent fasting type person that just has a smaller window of eating? And there's some benefits to that. It doesn't work for everybody, but there are some benefits to that as well. Um, and it's starting to look at, what do I do? Because this is, the world has told me I should do it. I should have breakfast every morning, or I should have these types of foods, or I should try these snack bars, or, why are you doing what you're doing? And that's the first place. That's where my book can really help. If you don't really understand what are you doing and why are you doing it, that's where you want to start. Because more than likely, you are so ingrained in diet culture. You are so ingrained, and it's not your fault, because it's been all around us. It's in the marketing strategies, it's in the sales strategies, it's in food strategies. They'll highlight some food and they'll tell you it's low fiber. The new one now is that it's keto friendly,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
like, okay, so that's the new buzzword. It's like, oh, I should buy this because it's keto friendly. And a keto diet has a specific use, and weight loss comes with it, but it's not its primary use. Its nutrition therapy purpose is for seizure disorder and epilepsy. And many, many
Oh, I never
people
knew that.
are putting themselves at risk by following this really restrictive carbohydrate diet to lose weight, because they're really altering their brain chemistry. So that's
Interesting.
another example of where the enemy brings in some diet, and it really is making us less well, not more well.
Yeah, and it really
So
it's
start
that not so much of a something being intrinsically evil, but like the misuse of it being leading
right,
to harm.
right,
That's really the
right.
enemy's
That's
good at
exactly
that.
right. It's exactly right. And so he always takes a little bit of truth and then he twists it, right? So it's a
Mm-hmm.
little truth with a whole bunch of a lie, and we get focused on the little bit of truth, and totally don't even consider, oh gosh, what's the lie part of this, and why am I doing this? And again, it's usually to lose weight. It's always about losing weight, losing weight. Well, if weight loss is your most important factor, ask yourself why. Is it because you want to feel better? Well, then feeling better is the goal, not losing weight.
Yeah,
If you want
yeah,
to manage your diabetes or your blood sugar or your heart disease or your blood pressure, then that's the goal. It's not losing weight so that those things can be controlled. It's controlling those things. That's the goal. And you got to
yeah.
really step back and say, gosh, how much am I being manipulated by this whole media and what they're telling me I should do and want? So when you look at the people who have been labeled as the crazy preppers, well, basically the homesteaders and the preppers have gone back to life the way it was really designed to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've taken themselves away from the rat race. They've taken themselves away from the manipulation and the mind control that comes from the marketing. And that's really getting back to who they are in Christ, who they were created to be, living as the temple their body is, feeding their body as the temple that it is, and really living out what you say you believe. If you say you are a child of the Most High God, if you say that you love God and the Holy Spirit lives within you, and then that means that the temple, your body is a temple, and then you pay really no attention beyond how many pounds you weigh, you're really defiling the temple.
Yeah.
And when you start to put it that way, that hurts. That stings. Because you say, well, I would never go to a church or temple or synagogue and defile that. Well, but you'll defile yourself
Yeah. And
by
it's
what
really
you
not
do
being
with your
honest
body
when you
and what you put in your body. Yeah, you're inauthentic And that's really how I came out of my disordered eating, was I realized I was being very, very inauthentic. I said I believed one thing, but how I was treating my body and how I was listening to the enemy in my mind, I wasn't believing God for my future. I wasn't believing God for my health and well-being. I wasn't following his guides. I was listening to whatever the most popular thing was. Well, what I've come to realize now, years later, that what was most popular in the commercials and the marketing was not meant for my good. It's been meant for my evil. And so that's what you got to start to look at, is they don't care about my good. They care about my money. They care about, manipulating me, controlling me. They don't care about my good. But the Lord cares about my good. His word tells me how to care about myself and take care of myself and my well-being, and looking at all the dimensions of my life and finding where that balance is, or where things are out of balance. So that's where people have to start, admitting that they have succumbed to diet culture without ever really realizing that it was a thing.
Yeah.
And then once you start to open your eyes and start to open and see and go, gosh, what am I doing with food and why am I doing it? Am I taking care of my temple body? Am I nourishing it? Am I honoring it as unto the Lord? Then it starts to put things into perspective. And once you start to look at that aspect of your life, then you have to look at stress, and you have to look at the impact of stress, and you have to look at, where is that stress coming from? Is it coming from what I'm reading? Is it coming from what I'm hearing? Is it coming from who I'm hanging out with? Is it coming from the job I have? Is it coming from the lack of being connected with the Lord? Am I in the wrong church? I was in the wrong church for most of my life and didn't know it till the last 5 years. And the Lord closed the church that I was in and said that a remnant would remain. And I didn't understand what that remnant really meant until just the last year, when I see that the remnant is who he's saving. The remnant is who he's calling for a bigger plan and a bigger purpose. We have to be well fed and healthy and whole in body, mind, and spirit if we're going to be able to carry out the tasks that he has for us to do.
Yeah, and it's really important to be mindful, the mindful me journey. And I do want to talk about the book, about where we can get this in a second. But it is important to be mindful about these things and to be honest about these things, because sometimes I feel like Christians hear this like canned answer of, it has to be this way, and I'm not allowed to like burgers, or I'm not allowed to like chips or something. And I'm not saying like you can go eat anything you want for health purposes, but I'm saying like we get so caught up in having the right answer that we forget about how we arrive to that answer. And if we're honest, then it makes it so much easier to maybe block some things out of your life, or to take the stress. It takes a lot of the stress out of it, is what I'm trying to say. For me, it was the job that I was working in. Sorry?
But orthorexia is actually perfect clean eating. It's people who are addicted to being, that's what it is. Orthorexia is perfect eating. It's having this need and desire to eat perfectly. And so instead of anorexia or bulimia that you maybe have heard about as an eating disorder, orthorexia. And there's a lot of people who walk around these perfect eaters, these clean eaters. Those are the words that they use. They're so hyper focused on what they eat, and they have to do it perfectly, and they have to tell you how wrong you are and how right they are about what they eat and how they do it. So there's an extreme, right? That's just as unhealthy, because you're still being manipulated by the enemy and by lies. You're not, you might be eating very cleanly, and you might be eating all the right foods, but if it's such an obsession and it's so overmanaged of your life, it's disorder. And anything of disorder is not of God, it's of the enemy. It doesn't matter what it is. Even if it's perfect eating, it can be of the enemy, and it can be dis-ease. So you have to be really careful and understand that the pendulum swings both ways. And, finding that sweet spot in the middle where God wants us to be and where God is our focus. nourishing our body to be able to be used by him, not nourishing our body for what we want to do, not nourishing our body for how we're going to look, but nourishing our body to be ready and prepared to do what God calls us to do.
So I'm actually excited about the book now, because this is obviously something that me and my wife are going to undertake. We're getting ready to move. We're uprooting and changing some things in our lives, and this might be really helpful. I could really use the energy, and I know being healthier is going to help me be able to do that.
Well, the Mindful Me journey is.
And I want to get one for.
Yeah.
I'm going to get some for me and my wife, obviously, but I want to get something for the audience as well.
There's I did it into 4 phases. And how I did it is, if you were sitting and working with me as a coach, or as a dietitian, so I would have kind of keep track, not of what you're eating, but of how you feel. What are the emotions and the feelings? What happened before, during, and after that meal that led you to make the selections that you made? So one thing you might discover is, we went through the drive-through because we're going from ball game to ball game. We had, one child had a ball game, the next child had a ball game, and we went through the drive-through, and why we made the choices that we made. Okay. So that's uncovering, what are you doing and why are you doing it? Because you can't make changes if you don't understand what are the dynamics that are at play. So phase 1 is 10 days of journaling. What are you doing with food? Why are you doing it? There's direct prompts that you answer that help you look at these different aspects. And then at the end of that 10 days, there's a reflection for you to look back on those 10 days and say, okay, what are the things we did most often? What are the things we did least often? So did I exercise? How many times did I exercise? Maybe I exercise twice every day. Okay, that could be a flag, just as much as I only exercised one time in the whole entire week. And by exercise, I mean activity. It can be washing the car. It can be mowing the grass. It can be playing with your kids out in the yard. It doesn't have to be, I went to the gym and I exercised on this machine for 45 minutes.
That's good to know.
But that's what people have gotten into their mind, is that it has to be this prescription. No, that's not what God created. There were no gyms back in God's time. When Noah was building the ark, his activity was building the ark. That's what his activity was, right? It was doing work for the Lord. So if you're out walking up and down, handing out water bottles to people at a ball game or whatever, that's activity. So you have to start to think about it differently. Phase 2 then is, okay, understanding, what am I doing? What do I want to do differently? And starting to look at, could I think of something differently? For instance, if I'm watching television and I normally bring a bag of chips with me and I mindlessly eat out of that bag, I have to then think, do I want to bring these chips with me, and make a choice? So that's kind of phase 2, is beginning to say, okay, can I make a different choice? Instead of bringing the chips with me, could I bring popcorn for one, but could I bring a fidget toy and play with the finger with a fidget toy? Because that's really what I want, is just a fidget. And I'm using food to fidget instead of some other alternative.
I'd never made
But
that connection.
starting to think of those kinds of things. Then phase 3 is putting guardrails in place and saying, okay, I do like to have some chips before I go to bed, but I know if I bring the whole bag with me, I'm going to eat the whole bag. So a guardrail I'm going to put in place is to take a handful out and put it on a plate, and then put the rest of the bag away. And then I'm going to make myself learn how to eat it really low, and really pay attention to the crunch and the feel in my mouth and the texture and the smell, and really notice my food as I'm eating it, instead of just mindlessly hurrying up and doing it as an activity. I'm going to enjoy and savor my food, which you already said you and your wife like to do. So it's bringing back that element to all parts of the food that you eat. The drive-through food, as well as food that you have as a snack in the evening in front of the television. And then the last phase, the 4th, again, there's a review after each of those 10 days, the review that lets you go back and look and kind of come back to, what did I do well? What am I still need to work on? How do I reframe that? And then the last phase is focusing on nutrient-rich choices. Looking at how nutrient rich are the food I'm choosing and selecting. and then being able to go through and begin to build nutrient-rich foods that are whole foods, that are based on the foods that God created, planted, grew, and putting those all together. So people can use that book on their own. And I will say, if they start going through it and they say, gosh, I really need to talk through this with somebody like her, because she's bringing things to mind that I wouldn't have even thought of. Well, that's where working with somebody one-on-one might be the right fit. If you're really, really stuck in diet and really, really not able to move past phase 1 very easily, then you might need some help, but geared to help you uncover each of those pieces of the onion, so to speak, so that you can get to nutrient-rich eating just by the discovery of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it's available on Amazon.
Yep, and I'm going to have the link here. I will put that in the description. For those of you guys who are listening on audio and maybe you don't have the video element of this, this is litwellnesssolutions.com. Again, that's litwellnesssolutions, all one word, .com. Tanya, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with us and opening my mind to some new thoughts and some new things to chew on, no pun intended.
That's great. That's what we're all about, trying to just help share information and help people think things in new ways. So that's great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Uh-huh.